Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our financial town hall, Just Ask Jen. Today, we're going to be talking about our state and federal grants, and particularly around Title I, because that seems to be the biggest question these days. And then we're going to celebrate the ending of ESSER. So let's start with introductions. I'm going to turn it over to my left.
Brandon Craig, board member.
Eve Bolton, board member.
Mike Augustin, Assistant Treasurer.
Thank you all. So, Mr. Robb, if you'll flip to the next slide, we're going to have Brandon's going to introduce how we can get participation.
Yes. So the audience at home, if you would like to, if you're watching us by Zoom, click on the reactions icon and then raise your hand and you'll be recognized to speak. You can also send your questions through the chat to the moderator. Additionally, if you're on Facebook, you can type your questions into the comments section as we're keeping an eye on the live stream. And as always, if you're in person, feel free to come down and join us at the podium.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so we're going to dive right into state and federal grants. Keep going. So this slide and the next slide is a list of all the state and federal grants, at least the major ones that we get. Title I, Part A, being the largest share, it represents about 40%, 47% of all of our state and federal grants, at least on the public side. We won't go into every single line item, but see, certain grants have very specific purposes. The first one being it's improving basic support for students who are economically disadvantaged. The next two are around neglected and delinquent. Then we have Title II-A, which is about supporting instruction. So a lot of money is spent on professional development and helping our teachers grow and get better skilled, learning new techniques. Then we have our limited English our language instruction for English language learners, which sometimes is called multi-language learners now. So I'm never really sure, but that you can see that we don't get a whole lot of money in state and federal grants for supporting our second language learners. And then we have some money for immigrants and student support. And Title IV used to be called Safe and Drug-Free Schools, if you remember, for those of us who've been around for a while. Now it's about support and enrichment. And actually this year we used that money to help us with the Yonder bags. So that was like a new effort. And then we have grants around supporting students with disabilities. And that's very specific and restricted funding. And then we have funds that are targeted for our little ones, or as Dr. Moffitt calls the littles, our preschools kids. And so early childhood education has several different grants, but if you'll flip to the next slide. So in total, we have around 50 million, and then we're estimating another portion of carryover. So some of our grants allow us to carry over unspent funds into the next year, and some don't. Some have limitations and some don't allow it at all. But for the most part, we're expecting another $5.6 million for next year to support our budget priorities for next year. Just wanted to point out here, there's a grant for supporting homelessness, students experiencing homelessness. Head Start is for early childhood, preschool education, and Carl Perkins is to support career tech. Anyway, I'll pause there. Do we have any questions about any of this?
So Jen, I wanted to just, not really a question, but highlight the fact that as we talk about how we fund schools, and we've done this before in previous conversations, but specifically with federal grants, this plays such a huge part in different ways because they have so many things that tap into really targeted resources for folks. And even though there may not always be a lot of funds in each of the grants, there are dollars that we are counting on to provide the goods and services that we provide to our students. And so I think it's just important to note that we utilize multiple different channels of how we fund our schools.
Right, exactly. And these are highly regulated, highly monitored, highly audited, and that we have to spend the money first and then ask for reimbursement. So you have to manage your cash balances well enough to be able to afford to pay the bills while you wait for a reimbursement. So next slide. So we have to share this money with our non-public friends who support CPS student residents. And you can see where they get about $13 million of that big pot. And so it's 13 million on top of what we get, the 50 million. And then, so that represents, I can't read that percent, but 27%, my old age. And so anyway, so it's not just all our money, and thank you. The students in non-public schools receive services using these funds for improving instruction for the same restricted purposes. Okay. Keep going. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to our more than me expert on state and federal grants, Mr. Gustin, because he works with the grants team, and so he's going to go into the basics and some rules about spending.
Cool. Thank you, Jen. I get the privilege of working with our small but mighty grants team on a daily basis. So one thing I'm going to say a ton of times is supplemental. If you take one word out of this whole conversation, it's supplemental, and that all federal funds are meant to be supplemental to what we do with local money and state money. So big one for Title I. Title I, like Jen said, is the biggest chunk. Title I is based on economic disadvantage. So the higher percentage of your students that are economically disadvantaged, the more Title I money you'll get. So, and obviously Title I, like I said, is supplemental. So remember that, always supplemental. We have a lot of rules about what's allowable, what's not allowable. So we're not going to go into those because we don't have 4 hours tonight. But there are some kind of wild rules. The state will give us an allocation, usually June, and it changes up through June. And so we'll do an initial budget for the year. The numbers we get are based on student enrollment from October of the prior year. So our initial Title I funds for next year are already locked in based on the enrollment of October 31st, 2024. And so we'll start with that budget. It has to be allocated out to the schools. Title I is meant to be a school-based allocation, though we can reserve some money for central initiatives. So we have some central money supposed to go to the schools. There are rules about how we rank the schools and how we give money to each school. Not going to go into that, but each school is going to get a pot of money that then they can use. We've made the decision a long time ago of what level of poverty to serve. So initially, the state requires you, or the feds, I guess, require you to serve any school with more than 75% poverty has to be served by Title I. To kind of spread it out along our district over the time, we actually go at 40%. So if a school has 40% or more kids and uses the way we measure this as free and reduced lunch, we're going to make them a Title I school and bring them onto our Title I group. Next slide, Rob.
Just to kind of summarize on the supplemental rule, is that the way they look at it, it has to sit on top of everything that's required. So if it's required to run a school or if it's required by state law, collective bargaining agreement, or board policy, it can't be used. The general fund has to spend that money, has to resource that. Anything that goes above and beyond what's the basics and what's required by the district is what's considered supplemental.
Yeah, the easiest example I use is so say like third grade math. You know, every kid's going to get a math book. Of course, it's probably electronic now, but every kid gets this math book. That's a general fund expense that will apply to every student across the entire district. But a Title I school could go in and say, in order to help our kids, we're going to buy a supplemental. We're going to buy like a workbook, a supplemental workbook. That would be a supplement to the base curriculum, and that would be a Title I allowable expense. Next slide, Rob. Oh, thank you. So as Treasurer Wagner mentioned, we front the money first and we get reimbursed. We do a process every month called a project cash request. So we take the spending from the previous month and then we put a request into the state to reimburse us. So again, you have to have the money up front to be able to run these programs. We also have to file what's called a final expenditure report. And that's due in September, at the end of September, and that closes out the grant for that year. Once the final expenditure report's filed, accepted, the money is done. You know, that books are closed for that particular year's grant. As always with any of our funds, you know, funds are meant to be spent on students in that year. So and that's for general fund, that's for anything. The idea is current year's budget should support the education of students in the current year. And the other thing that I'll talk about briefly is if you don't spend. So you have opportunities to spend, you have carryover as we've shown. You get to a point where if districts don't spend the money, there's a thing called a sweep. And so the state will come in and say, you've had months to spend this money, you haven't spent it, now we're going to take it back. And then they reallocate that money back to other districts. So for us, that's like a 27-month period. So you have the initial 12 months fiscal year, you have another 12-month fiscal year, and then you have until September 30th. That's your 27 months. Usually, we actually use a lot of times gain money on sweeps. So after the sweeps, there's a reallocation. So that's like a little extra carryover sometimes we get mid-year that we can also leverage. Next slide, Rob. All right, so budgeting process, I think we talked about this, and we're October enrollments there. The other thing that's on this slide is how schools become Title I. So like I said, as we've that 40% threshold hits, and we've had schools in the last couple of years hit that 40% threshold. Their first year in Title I, they're what's called targeted assistance. And so the school actually has to rank kids by academic need, and then only those kids can be served. And while they're doing that, the school's developing a plan, so a school-wide plan, and then the next subsequent year, they become school-wide. So then the title money can apply to kids across the entire school. All right, next slide. All right, one more, Rob. All right, so this brings us to our this is our Title I decision tree. So this is a document, you may have seen it before. This is kind of one of the things we do to try to guide schools on how to spend their Title I money. And the first part of this is for staffing. So, we've worked with the superintendent and deputy superintendent to talk about their high-level look at what they want for Title I for next year. And then we give this out to schools and say, okay, if you want staff, here's a sequence of how you would allocate staff. And so there's a slide here for elementary schools, and there's another one for middle schools and junior highs, and there's a third one for high schools. They're all very similar. I don't know if we need to get into the details.
Explain, Mike, how the Title I plan fits into this allocation.
All right, so every school has, so you mean like every school's one plan? Is that,
Right.
yeah, so every school develops a one plan based on the needs of that school. So this is work you do, with your instructional leadership team, with the principal, with district support to say what are the needs that we need that our school specifically needs. And then using that plan, like if you said one of our needs is reading, right? One of our needs is reading for our school. A really easy intervention would be to add a reading specialist, who would do, work with kids, pull out work with kids on reading. If you identified attendance, there's an attendant social worker position, that's a possibility. And so those two things should really dovetail nicely together.
Right, so the intent is for the dollars to use the data to drive your budget and where your students' academic needs are.
I think it's worthwhile to note with each of the different opportunities to add a staff member, the hope and the goal is always that the addition of that staff member is dedicated to that idea of providing greater assistance to the students to meet the potential need that a student who's on the lower income level would need, right? So we know a lot of our schools have a number of students who may need that additional person kind of being able to care for and to provide that additional little bit of assistance. And in recent years, we've had a number of the LSDMCs reach out to figure out how do they get added to be a Title I school for that reason, because they do have a number of students now, especially in light of some of the things that have happened
Right.
in our recent economy and some of the dollars that are no longer flowing through from COVID to families, that have made more families in that lower income brackets and more families subject to being considered economically disadvantaged. And so, we now have then more students who will fall into that category, and therefore more schools who may be meeting that 40% threshold.
Exactly right. So yes, it used to be kind of a stigma to be considered a Title I school, and now it's kind of everybody wants to be Title I because they get more resources and to help their students. So do you want to go through, this is a high school slide, okay, keep going. Okay, so we'll pause there and see if there's any questions specifically about any of the title grants or anything like that. before we move on.
Yeah, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Oh, sorry.
That's
For the board
okay.
members first.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
Taxpayers first, that's all right with me. Just a quick question about if it is 70%, it has to be a Title I?
They require that we serve any school that's economically disadvantaged is 70% of their population or greater.
70 or 75?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and we have determined that it's 40%?
We've been doing that for probably 15, 20 years.
Makes
yes.
sense.
Yes, it's a district
And,
practice.
and the justification or the reasoning is, do you have any idea?
Beyond my time.
That's hard to imagine.
I know. But yes, I don't know specifically why, other than the pressure to add more resources to individual schools who had the same needs as the higher population of and economically disadvantaged.
And for the economically disadvantaged piece, that people used to be able to say free lunch or what have you. How is that determined regarding our percentage of economically disadvantaged?
So, Michael,
Free and reduced lunch is probably the easiest way to look at it. There are a couple different rankings you can use, but the way that we do it is we look at free and reduced lunch. We have a lot of schools that are in community eligibility CEP. And so most of those schools end up qualifying at 100% economically disadvantaged.
And I know we decided somewhere along the line that, I think it was because we could do it. We had almost all of our schools get up to 100%, and they may not have been, but it was a way to receive the additional funding and the food and what have you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah, so the community eligibility program does allow schools to identify as 100%. So it allows our student dining services department to feed all students in that program, in that school, rather than just the students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. So the positive was more students are being fed. Then the downside of that is we didn't get more money, so that money, as we add more kids, gets spread a little bit thinner across the district. And so there's a balance between those two decision points. Now, district-wide, we're about 87% economically disadvantaged. And, you know, like some of our sister urban cities, Cleveland, Columbus, are more at 100% because they are district-wide with their CEP programs. So it helps them in the funding formula a little bit more than it helps us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, questions from the public? Before you start, actually, we have a little special guest, surprise guest in the audience. Julie, you want to join us? There's a chair. Yeah, chair right here. Yep, come on up. All right, so I'm Bob Barker. Come on down.
Make your way through the crowd.
So Ms. Sellers, our CFT president, was a surprise guest in the audience. We've asked her to join us on stage so she can give us things from the teacher's perspective. So go ahead, Rob. Sorry, we keep interrupting you.
Oh, that's completely okay. We're glad to have everyone here today. So the first question is, what happens if a district does not have the money up front to be able to pay for the programs before they're reimbursed?
That's a great question. There's some tools that districts could use. They can borrow money against advanced property taxes if they can, about 80%. So our property taxes come in twice a year. Our revenues come in twice a year. If in December they're low on cash, then they can borrow against those future revenues, short-term future revenues. They can go in a state loan fund, which is probably not a good idea. And then longer term, they would just need to go back to the taxpayers for a new levy. So they have enough cash to manage that flow.
Nice. And then does it also apply to private schools as well, those same rules?
Private schools do not get federal funds. The money passes through them, passes through us to them. And then so there's clerks that will spend the money for those particular children, but it's our cash flow that it hurts.
Here we go. I think one aspect of that also just to pay attention to, and it's something we've been talking about recently, is this is why cash balance is important, is because you may have these expenses that come up at a time related to, pass-through dollars, but also related to our own Title I spending or whether the federal titles we were spending under, that we do have to cover those costs up front. And so we have to be able to wait until federal government pays us back. And I know in most cases I think we showed on the chart there, it's monthly that we would submit, and there's the process of getting it back, but you don't get it back like tomorrow.
Yeah, so, at the end of the month, we usually take, 10 days to close the books for the month. So we take those reports, send them up to the state and ask for reimbursement, and it takes them 2 weeks to review that data, ask some questions, ask for more evidence. So usually about a month later, we'll get the funds back. So, another question?
What kind of projects or programs do federal education grants for K-12 typically support? And we covered a little bit of this.
So just to repeat some of that was to helping extra academic needs and tutoring, extra reading specialists to help with reading or math, social work, graduation counselors, students with disabilities. It helps with assistive technology and things that are required by their IEP. English language learners, English tutors, what were you going to say?
Class size reduction.
That's not part of Title II anymore. It used to be. So you're kind of an old schooler like me. Now,
Professional
Title
development.
IIA is specifically about professional development and improving teacher quality. Were you going to say something?
Seeking professional development.
Right.
We talked about yonder pouches. just
And
a
there's
lot
grants
of class-
specifically
yeah.
supporting preschool, yes.
Yeah, preschool classrooms, a lot of instructional materials, field trips, sometimes a lot of field trips. Give the kids opportunities to do those are funded.
Thank you. Okay, so before you ask your next question, I'm going to ask, is there anything you want to say specifically about teaching and learning and title? Do you want a few minutes to think about it before?
Yes, one of the things that I was thinking about is for the state's fair funding formula and how that is phasing in, because we've heard they weren't going to phase it fully in, and now they're talking about, yes, they are going to fully phase it in. And then what is the impact of the guarantee on the urban districts?
So that wasn't really a topic for tonight, but I'll try to answer your question. That's okay. This is mostly about state and federal grants, not the fair funding formula. But so we're anxiously awaiting for the governor's budget to come out. I don't think it's been released yet unless I missed it, and about the phase in of the funding formula. And I'm not familiar with the guarantee language. At least I don't remember it. And so I'm looking at a member of our audience. Kevin, can you answer that question? You want to come to the podium? If you can't, if the answer is no, that's okay. Well, we can research. Yeah, we're on the formula. We haven't been on the guarantee for years, but I don't know if it's language changing in the fair funding formula.
I
We'll have to
did.
look at that.
I did, Jen, see some information that came out about, literally this morning, that there was at least a release of some of the points. And so one of the things that was mentioned was they were going to continue the fair funding formula, but on the 22 level amounts. And so, I think, again, this goes a little bit into why we use some of these other grants and other things to provide resources, because we don't get a true fair amount for our students from our state funding. So we do have to add and find other methods to really supplement the education that the
Right.
kids are getting in order to give them the necessary tools.
So let me interpret what he just said, because what he says is they're going to go ahead and phase it in, but they're only going to use the 2022 cost factors, which means they're not going to keep up with the rate of inflation or cost of living increases, because we're in 2024. So the salaries that they're using to cost out the formula and the related benefits are related to 2022 costs. So that's going to hurt us. Yes.
Jen, what role does the federal Department of Education play in the dispensing of these funds? I know it goes through the states, but, you know, there's a great deal of worry among our families and what have you regarding the role of the federal folks in education. What role does that department play in these grants or anything else that you can think of?
So on the federal side, they they develop budgets for each state for the federal grants, and the states determine how they allocate it out. So if the federal Department of Education goes away, we don't know yet. We're anxiously awaiting. Mike?
I would just say, you know, this is like the example of federalism. So the federal government gives the states money and rules. Says you can spend this money, but here are the rules. State comes to CPS and says, here's some money and rules. You know, we apply those rules as best we can and get money back, but the auditing goes up the other way. So, you know, the state is audited by the federal government. So it's really about the two pieces, right? It's about how much money we get and then what rules or stipulations are tied to that money from the federal government.
One of the things that I've heard and I've seen charts on is that the federal departments are going to absorb the U.S. Department of Education roles and their budgets. So for example, they said like the Department of the Treasury, they would be in charge of student loan programs, direct loans, FEL loans, Perkin loans, federal Pell Grant programs, health education assistant loan programs, and then education, sciences, and data. But we don't know how they are going to be funded within those new departments. The Department of Labor will have career tech and adult education programs, and then vocational rehabilitation programs. The Department of Health and Human Services would include the special ed grants and those dollars going to the states. IDEA, which are the special ed dollars, American Printing House for the Blind, and the Helen Keller National Center for the Deaf, Blind Youth and Adults. And then the Department of Justice will include the Office of Civil Rights, because they feel that one of the things that I've read is that they feel like they are paying for multiple administrative roles, and this is going to reduce those upper level. But nobody knows what they're going to do with the budget.
It's, in my experience, it's super, super, super early to start being too nervous, because even with the governor's budget that's coming out, it's going to change and change and change until June. And so we're just keeping to monitor it.
I think it's important to eliminate redundancy, for sure. I think that's a sensible thing for any bureaucracy. But I do think that the vast majority of these grants and these funds that we are receiving have been acts of legislation by the federal government. I mean, the laws created these grants for these particular purposes. Right. And so you cannot, well, maybe you can now, but normally you can't just stop it. But I do think that you're going to see a lot of pressure, maybe more pressure about, let's say, families that have kids that have learning disabilities or challenges. When they start to get really upset that maybe those additional funding's not going to be there, I think no matter where Washington is, they will find a place to start to advocate. But these are legislative actions. This isn't something that a bureaucrat created. This is legislative work over many years, and still is underfunded based upon what the original legislation said it was, especially Title I.
Yeah, but what you said makes me think like the money's still going to be there. It's just going to be managed by different people and maybe with less people. So it might be more complicated for us to deal with. But because it's legislative written, the funds should still be funded. Right. There might be more competition for the funds. Mike, did you want to say something? Okay. Another question?
Yeah, what's the difference between school-wide and targeted assistance for federal title funds?
So I think we covered that a little earlier. So the first year of school is Title I. They're in what's called targeted assistance. And so they have to identify kids who need assistance and provide assistance to those kids only. And so there's a lot more paperwork, right? Because you're identifying a group of kids, figuring out what interventions those kids need, doing that. Part of that also is you build your school-wide plan. So during that first year, you're building up a plan, you know, we call it like your one plan. And then usually in your second year as a Title I school, you transition to being school-wide. So now the Title I money can serve all the kids in your school.
Thank you.
Mike, a follow-up to that. We have a question about how parents and the community get involved in Title I funding. As they go into that one plan and they go into that first year, how do parents become involved in that process for Title I's and grant funding?
So that's a great question. I think the encouragement there is through the local school decision-making committees, the LSDMCs. So, I mean, I would encourage any parent to get involved with that. There are some other Title I things. There are some notifications we have to send out. So parents should be getting some notices backpacked to them, for their students. One's just an awareness of what Title I's funding's for. There are some other opportunities. The other thing I would encourage parents to do is look for parent engagement nights or events. So every school has to dedicate a certain amount of money to parent engagement, parent involvement. Usually how this is done at CPS is the schools have curriculum nights. They have reading nights. They have different events for the parents to come and get some Title I information, get some information about the curriculum, and interact with the staff. So I would encourage all parents to keep an eye out for those events and attend.
I think one other thing to add on to that, Mike, is that parents utilizing the resources that are provided in that targeted year are also a necessary part of us being able to demonstrate that they are in fact a Title I school, right? So if we have parents who are not having their kids utilize some of those benefits and targeted efforts to keep them resourced, it makes it harder and harder to show that they are actually in need for the entire school to receive that benefit.
You know, the federal requests and federal requirements for engagement are remarkably strong and stringent. And I would imagine even a conservative administration that likes to talk a lot about parent rights, then very frankly, in these areas of grants and engagement, parents have a tremendous amount of power and opportunity, even in the rule book itself for these grants. And it's really a model of engagement, frankly.
So if this is redundant, because we were having a little side conversation, there is a Title I set aside for parent involvement to encourage parents to be involved in their students' education. And that is checked every year. They actually came out, last year they came out, they brought 30 people, and they went to a bunch of our schools and talked to parents and teachers and paraprofessionals and students. And it was a challenge, but we did really well. So the conversation we were having is we were wondering if that question came from a parent that was thinking, how do I sign my student up for Title I funding? It's not really that specific. It's more applied. The economically disadvantaged qualifies the school to receive title funding, and then we send out a per pupil value for the school to build a budget around the population and needs with the students. Targeted assistance is more about the ranking of the students' needs and starting with those kids while you're building your school-wide plan. So it's not like a parent can sign up to have, I want my child to have Title I. So we weren't sure if that's where their origin. We just wanted to clarify. So thank you, Julie, for bringing that up.
And it also does not mean that just because the child is living at a certain poverty level, that they automatically get extra services. They have to show the academic need also.
Thank you. I'd like to take just a second to remind people, if you're watching us on Facebook or on Zoom, that you can go ahead and click the hand icon or leave a question in the comments. We'll happily ask the panel the question if you have any questions about title funding or federal grants in general. So please feel free to participate. We'd love to have you. To the next question would be accountability and reporting. How do the community, the federal government, auditing, how do they know that these funds are being used for the purposes that they're required to be used for?
So we report to our finance committee, which is a subcommittee of the board, every month. We share district-wide and school, not school level on federal funds, but district-wide level. Um, uh, We get audited 13, 14 times a year, it seems like. Um, And desk reviews, so it's like more like a walkthrough audit rather than a really financial audit. What else am I missing?
I think that's all good. I would say the state audits us every year. 1 year out of every three, as Jen mentioned, they come on site. I think last time they brought 13 people. They visited 30 different schools. They talked to parents, they talked to teachers, they talked to principals, they talked to staff. They looked at our spending. They went out to fixed assets, like some of the assets we had bought. They wanted to go inspect those to make sure that what we said we bought did. So state does a very good job of auditing us, and then usually the feds audit them. So sometimes it's like a double
Right.
layer, so you can get double audited if you're lucky.
And keep in mind that when we submit our request to be reimbursed every month, they look at every expenditure to make sure it's a qualifying expenditure. So it's looked at monthly, it's looked at annually, and then we try to report it out on a regular
I think
basis.
one other thing that we do, that we've been doing especially lately, to ensure that we are holding ourselves accountable, is that there've been a lot more education that's been put into spending those dollars early, spending those dollars while we can, not trying to wait till the end of the year or the end of the school year to spend those dollars. And that has had a significant difference also with us using the full amount of those funds, because the other part of being accountable is that it's not just a budget for it, it's you actually then spend it. And that was, for years and years upon years was the struggle. You'd be a Title I school, you'd have these dollars and you would not use all those dollars, or you'd have dollars for something, one of the other title programs, and not get, and have money pulled back. And I think, we talked about being swept up. We have thankfully, I think this last time report, we only had one small amount that wasn't able to be carried over, and we've been really getting through those carryovers lately. So I think that's a really good point to note of the work that the folks in the office have been doing to
And,
educate and hold accountable on our own level.
and that wasn't through any fault of the schools or anything like that. It's just we had a significant turnover in one position within a very short time period, and so there was always relearning, and then we just ran out of time to spend the money. Okay, so let's hit the ESSER stuff, and then we'll answer more questions as they come up. So tonight, I was going to have some funeral music playing, but we are celebrating the end of ESSER, and so we just wanted to kind of give like a final report out. Go ahead and flip the next slide.
Jen, I thought we were going to do it New Orleans style, so we're going to have like a little marching band.
Oh, I forgot.
Dun 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 da da dun.
There
Oh
you
wait,
go.
that's Star Wars.
So what this slide shows you is all the grants that we have that we were allocated as a result of COVID and the recovery from COVID. So it totaled 325 million. It was over a 3-year period, well, 3.5-year period, I guess. And I just want to state that we spent that money without not one extra accounting body to manage those funds. And so it was a huge, heavy lift for our grants department, but they did it well. And we've spent almost every penny of it. Yes, shout out to grants. So we'll go into, we mostly talk about the first three because those are the three biggest and they had the widest level of use. But the ones that are below that were very targeted to specific populations, specific needs. So next slide. So these are the targeted ones, and we won't look at them, but mostly they were targeted to children with special needs, early childhood, or homelessness, and helping them because they had some very unique needs during recovering of COVID. Go ahead, next slide. This kind of shows you how those top big those three grants were spent by category. You can see we spent a lot of money on technology. So early on, remember, there was a big rush to get technology in the use of every student and every teacher's hands, because not everybody had a device where they could teach remotely. So, so we expanded our technology leases. There's a lot of money that was spent on staffing at the time. So we used that money for extra paraprofessionals in the building for social distancing. We called them health and safety paras. We had super subs, so instead of having building subs that floated between buildings, we would have specific bodies that were assigned to schools so they weren't carrying virus from one building to the next. As time went on, we transitioned our nursing contract, the citywide nursing contract, and we went from $1.8 million, so nurses that were shared between buildings, to a nurse in every building, and we went up to almost $9 million in nursing services. And then eventually, the resource coordinators jumped into ESSER because that grant dried up. And so those were, and then facilities was a big spend. We used the money for repairs in air conditioning, what's the airflow? Air quality, thank you. That was early on, and then we started using the money to help expand some of the buildings that were overcrowded, like Pleasant Ridge, Hyde Park, and Walnut Hills. And so that's the big facility expense there. So next slide. This also shows you, it's a different way of looking at it, but for how each grant had a different purpose, and so they had different spending rules. So the first ESSER one was about just a response, cleanliness and getting prepared, trying to figure out what to do. The second one was about how do we do remote learning in a big way. And the third one was about recovering from academic loss during COVID. And so you can see that's how we spent our money out. And I think that was the last slide. All right, yeah, go back. We'll do that last. Okay, so any comments or questions from my colleagues here about ESSER?
I think one thing to note about ESSER, and this is something that, you know, as I was coming onto the board, we were talking about, which is that there was a lot of folks who thought of great ideas for us to do, and everybody had a great plan of things that we could spend money on. And you know, you would say you have this $300 million, and it sounds really nice and wonderful when you say 300 million. When the reality was that, you know, a certain portion of it had already been ESSER 1 that had, you know, in large part been used up, right? ESSER 2 was a certain portion of it that had specific purposes of remote learning, and so we spend a lot on technology, those type of things. So when you get down to the nitty gritty of like what you actually had to spend by the time you get back to everybody's back in school on ESSER dollars, it wasn't the like 300 million that I think, you know, some folks saw it as, and it wasn't in 1 year, right? So like we had to be doing these things over multiple years to really be able to provide those resources. And so I do think in some ways when we still talk about it, or when people think about it and they say, well, you had this $300 million, like how did you use it? Like we used it over multiple years, doing a lot of different things and covering the cost of a lot of things that were necessary and targeted for those specific purposes. Not just, we went out and spent $300 million in one day and then sat around and said, oh darn, we don't have $300 million anymore. But the other one, and I think it's worth noting in some ways, the amount of technology change and how much access the students have to technology now than they had before COVID, and how many of our younger students got more familiar and were able to use some of these things and these resources is tremendous, but it also is a great value to how we talk about education, because education is not going to stay the same as it was 15, 20 years ago. These students are using things and becoming more adapted, doing things with technology in a way that allows us to keep growing. And so it's awesome to see that that was part of what we came out of COVID with, is this now acknowledgement that students learn differently and need new resources and may need things differently because of the things that they've gone through.
Yeah, I'd have to say that early on when we were going through all of our planning, we tried really hard not to put recurring expenses in ESSER funds, because we knew that cliff was coming and that when the money dried up, what we were going to do. And so, but as time went on and budget challenges grew because inflation grew as a result of COVID, I mean, you know, everybody's prices went up because of shipping delays and, you know, construction issues and stuff like that, that our general operations made it harder and harder to stay in paying for the things we were already doing. And so things started getting shifted into ESSER, particularly around transportation, as those costs increased because fuel went up dramatically, right? And so we did face a cliff, and this last budget year was probably one of the most difficult budget years I've had in 32 years. I thought when the first time we did ESSER, when I had 27 versions of the budget, I know Ms. Bolton was around when we went through that, trying to figure out what to fund and if we were going to have to lay people off. You know, businesses were closing all around us and people were being laid off all around us. We were trying really hard to hold on to our staffing because we knew the students would need that support. It was really hard.
I think that we learned an awful lot during ESSER from a standpoint of it allowed us to figure out where we had great inadequacies, particularly our families that did not have internet access at home, and figuring out, well, there are whole neighborhoods that don't because it's not billable for the people that are supplying it, that service. So we learned something about that had to be corrected. We found out that as important as all the new things are for technology, which is now so essential, and even more so and more so, we also found out that families and children and staff want that personal touch. They want the teacher in the room, and you can do only so many things from an electronic standpoint, so to speak. But it really has made us think about what our values were and what we need to be able to do together with the money that we received. And thank goodness we had it. Years ago, when the first Obama administration, we had an influx that also helped save the district in a number of ways, and as long as you use the money properly. And I think it helped set us up for our next century.
Julie, do you want to make any comments? Okay. Questions out there, Mr. Rob?
Yeah, our first question is, are all of our schools Title I funded?
No. I've lost track. We have 6,
Let's see.
10?
See here, it's everyone except Walnut, Kilgore, Hyde Park, Sands, and the Rising Stars Academies, the preschool-only academies.
Right.
Because Title I doesn't
No,
apply to
Spencer's going to be
preschool
Title I
only.
this year. They qualified. So, yeah, I think there was 5 there, and then the Rising Stars Academies. Every year we add more and more schools to the list. They were Title I last year,
They were, yeah, 2
2
years
years ago. So they're school-wide now.
SCPA and Clark started this year, right? Or Clark started this year, and then Spencer will start next year.
Right. Targeted last year and they're school-wide this year, or 26, 25? Yes. Thank you, Nan. She's our really big expert. Yes, yes. Well, Kansas is near and dear to your heart. We know that. Okay. Another question, Rob? How are we doing on time?
We're doing great. We have about 10 minutes left. Are any of the title grants focused around STEM and STEM resources?
Around what? I'm sorry?
STEM.
Well, Title IV can be. So Title IV is broad for a lot of things. You can use some of it for pure technology, and then you can use some of it for expanding programs around that. So, but there's not a very specific kind of STEM thing. I think a lot of times where we see STEM grants are kind of private foundations and private donors. You know, we pick up a lot of those that are very specific on STEM in a classroom or in a school.
I think that when STEM schools very first started, when we first opened Hughes, there were state dollars for that. And then that was state funded, so it wasn't coming like from federal grants.
I think the other part with STEM, or with dedicated programmatic things like STEM or like some of the others, Montessori, these type of things, you generally, from a federal level, they're not always going to see that as a thing that they're driving. So they may want to drive resources to schools. The state would be more the one they would charge with. If your state want to use title dollars towards STEM programming or something like that, or like connecting it up to career tech or something to that effect, those are things that I think we would look at more from the state level, managing how their resources are allocated out on which schools might qualify for certain funds based on things they're doing.
Right. So remember, a STEM program may not be supplemental on top of what regular instruction is, usually part of the instruction. So before we run out of time, we just want to advertise our future town halls. So the next one is going to be about sharing how we monitor performance in the treasurer's office and introducing our internal auditor and what she does and how she's helpful to the district. Then we're going to hopefully on April Fool's Day, we're going to try to invite maybe some of our state legislators with us so they can see what their role is in school finance. And then I wanted to announce that May 13th is being rescheduled to the 27th because it conflicts with graduation ceremonies and we didn't want people to have to choose because we know this is so popular, everybody wants to listen. And then, so we'll be focusing that on the facility master plan, the repair plan that needs to be funded. And then on June 10th will be a handoff to the new treasurer. But I had an idea this morning on my way in. I want to try to do an extra town hall at maybe Roberts and do it in Spanish. So for our English language learner families. So we'll see if we can figure this out.
This would be a
I'm
very
excited.
quiet from anybody but Jen on this.
No, we'll do it in English and have translators. I don't know that I can, I'm going to try to convert some of my slides into Spanish, but because we've been talking so much about our English language learner families, I thought, well, that would be a really cool experience.
We're going to change the title from that one from Just Ask Jen to Just Jen.
So anyway, there is, if you go on CPS schools website and on the financial information town hall page, there is a button there that you can ask for topics to be presented for future town halls. So just give us your feedback. We'd love to talk about anything. And we used to have a board member who said, welcome, because numbers are fun. So we enjoyed, and we want to especially thank you, Julie, for joining us today. That was really exciting. You were just bored, right?
No, I was just walking by and I'm like, oh, I'm going to see what they're saying. I said, I was just walking by and I thought, oh, I'll stop in and see what they're saying.
This is what happens when you stop by. You get put into the front seat.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so any more questions, Rob? Did we need to get to?
Yeah, we have a question about professional development. Why is that a focus of the federal grants, professional development, and who does it apply to in the district?
So Title II-A is for increasing teacher quality, and that is focused on improving instructional skills so that they can better serve the needs of our students. And so it's mostly used for teachers, like the treasurer's office wouldn't be able to use that money to advance our skill set. So, but it's mostly focused on and making teachers better. Did I answer that question right? Okay.
And of course, the last one, and we covered this a little bit, is how federal dollars are going to be affected by the political climate. Are there any concerns on the district level that there will see effects from the political climate moving in the future? How do we feel overall as a district? And that's our last question.
Either one of you want to answer that first? Go for it, Brian.
So, I think for me, there are three potential issues that we're going to see in the political climate. And so one of them is just the management of the dollars. So as Vice President Bolton said earlier, these dollars are a lot of ways are just are provided by law. And so how do you manage those dollars? How do you supervise who gets what dollars? What are the relationships between, like, for instance, the Department of Labor and the Department of Education, or the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, have a little bit of a working relationship because of things like apprenticeships and that type of stuff, but they don't have the same working relationship when it comes to education. So how do they manage an educational field if they're not skilled at understanding what programs are what? I think the second thing for me is how those dollars are then allocated at the state level because of just their general concern with how state funding for education happens. So if we give it all as a big block grant and you can use it kind of in multiple different ways, how does the state report up what they're doing with it? How does the state manage what schools do what? Do they take it out of your funding formula to say that you no longer get additional funds for this because this is all one bucket of state funds? So we saw this with, for instance, the additional funds we were getting for students with disabilities and some of the other programs and stuff that became part of the formula as opposed to being a pull out. Yeah, the student wellness money that became a part of the formula as opposed to a pull out. So does that become something that happens with how some of the title dollars are thought of by the state. And then the third one for me really is we have a lot of folks who do not realize they are receiving funds from the federal government. And while this district may not be as affected by this, I look at places like rural districts who will be extremely affected by some of the rural grants and the rural programming that is done under federal guidance, that if it's no longer managed by the Department of Education and now it's managed by Department of Agriculture or whoever might have it then, do these same resources come to those places? And then if they're not, is the state having to supplement, which means they're pulling funds out of what goes to one to the other? So are they pitting us against each other in order to get funding, even within the public school setting, right? So are you putting the urban districts and the rural districts against each other in order to get funding? And these type of things potentially could create challenges that it's something we'd have to figure out how it's managed. I think at the end of the day, we would want, our governor, at least in his statements, have said he's committed to public education, but we'd want people to really live up to some of those statements that they've made as to supporting education going forward.
I think that most of the concern, as these federal dollars may be moving to other departments, is what's going to be lost in the transference. Because everybody in like the new department may not have any understanding. There may not be anyone really working there that understands the process, why that funding formula was there, and then how is it going to go back to the state. So that concerns me of what's going to be lost in all of these department transfers, and will the right people be there who have an understanding of why those dollars were in place to begin with.
Just to follow up on that, this is my great worry. I think redundancy needs to end in order for things to be smooth. But once again, by cutting it all up and spreading it among different departments, it's the same mentality that everybody can do the education piece. Everybody can teach.
'Cause you're once a
Everybody can
student.
figure it out, yeah. And I just, to Julie's point and to what Brandon's talking about, the expertise is not going to be there. But that's happening across the federal government at this point, whether it's the FBI or education. We're getting rid of the people that know what they're doing in part by, cutting away. But the education, I kind of take it personally from a standpoint, well, anybody can figure out what to do about education.
On a more positive concept, and this might be naive, but if they get rid of redundancy, then more money may flow out to the individual student. So let's hope for that. Yeah. Well, good night. Thank you, everybody, for spending time with us at Just Ask Jen, and we look forward to seeing you all in March.